The sound of tires grinding gravel at full speed yanked me out of my peaceful morning like a fire alarm. My coffee nearly splashed out of the mug as I looked up, just in time to see the front wheels of Brenda's cherry-red ATV lift straight off the ground. She slammed right into the new wooden barrier I'd built across the trail. The impact launched her over the handlebars, and she landed flat on her back in a cloud of dust, and what I can only describe as pure embarrassment. Her cheap plastic sun visor flew off to the left, her phone skidded off to the right, and there she was on the ground, wailing like a banshee in broad daylight. "You tried to kill me," she screamed, arms flapping wildly, while her tiny, obnoxious dog yapped like crazy from its crate strapped to the back of the flipped ATV. I didn't say a thing. Just took a slow sip of my coffee, nodded toward the giant sign nailed to the barrier that said, "Private property." This was her third time cutting through my land that week. And somehow, she still had the nerve to act like I was the one breaking the rules. At this point, it wasn't just about a shortcut anymore. It felt like war. Brenda had been treating the trail behind my house like her own personal ATV racetrack ever since I moved in 6 months ago. At first, I figured it was a one-off. But then it became a daily ritual. Every morning, right around sunrise, I'd hear her engine fire up, and the next thing I knew she'd be tearing through my back acreage like she was competing in the Suburban X Games. One morning, I stepped outside to try and confront her, but she just gave me this sitcom wave, like we were pals, and zipped right by. Not once did she ask permission. She just assumed the land was hers to use. When I finally stopped her and mentioned the trail was on private property, she actually laughed and said, "Oh, please. Everyone uses that path. It's basically public access." But I checked. The deed was clear, no easements, no shared right-of-way. That trail was completely mine. Still, she kept coming. I tried everything short of a full-blown standoff. Put up no trespassing signs. She said the wind must have knocked them down. Added reflectors. She called them ugly and threatened to report me to the HOA. That's when I learned the kicker. She wasn't just any neighbor. Brenda had declared herself the head of HOA enforcement. Not an actual position, mind you, nobody voted for her, but she'd made herself a badge and carried it around like she was some kind of backwoods sheriff. She started sending me passive-aggressive notices for things like tools visible near my barn or the fact that my mailbox was apparently half an inch too short. Classic intimidation moves, all because I wouldn't let her use the shortcut. So I made a decision. I was done playing nice. I spent the weekend building a proper wall across that trail, solid wood, reinforced with concrete anchors and cedar beams. I wasn't messing around. I even set up 2 game cameras, one high, one low, so there'd be no debate if she came through again. And just to drive the point home, I painted a sign that read, "End of the road for shortcut queens." Sure, it was a little snarky, but after months of her garbage, I felt like I'd earned it. The morning she crashed was the first peaceful one I'd had in weeks. Of course, it didn't last. Brenda limped her way up to my porch, one of her ridiculous high-heeled gardening clogs clumping against the boards as she pounded on the door. She was screaming about lawsuits, saying I'd set up a death trap and that I'd be hearing from her lawyer. I just stayed calm and reminded her, once again, that the trail was on my land and she was trespassing. That only fired her up more. She threatened to call the cops. I told her to go for it. Then I pulled up the camera footage showing her ATV, clear as day, barreling past the property line. I showed her the video from a few days earlier, clear as day, her ignoring the signs. The moment she saw it, her face turned the same shade of red as that flashy ATV. She mumbled something about HOA bylaws, then turned on her heel and stormed off, dragging that wrecked vehicle behind her while her little dog snapped at her heels like it was just as mad. Honestly, I figured that would be the end of it. A reasonable person might have felt a little embarrassed, maybe even apologized. But Brenda? No chance. That night, my motion lights lit up over by the wall. I stepped out to see what was going on, and there she was, standing in her backyard, peering through a pair of binoculars like she was on a stakeout. She had her phone in one hand, a notepad in the other. Looked like she was gathering evidence, building some sort of case, as if this was law and order, suburbia. The very next day, I found a letter slipped under my door. Looked official at first glance, HOA letterhead, the whole 9 yards. It accused me of building an unauthorized barrier that violated community standards. And it was signed by none other than Enforcement Liaison Brenda. No last name. Just Brenda. Like she was Madonna or something. So the next morning, I drove straight to the county office. Sat down with a clerk, explained what was going on, and once again, they confirmed it. My land wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. Hadn't been for years. The lot used to be zoned agricultural before the neighborhood spread out this way. The clerk even printed out a copy of the exemption and stamped it for good measure. I couldn't stop smiling on the drive home. Brenda had no legal ground to stand on, but it looked like she was about to fall flat on her face anyway. That evening, she showed up with backup. 2 of her friends from the HOA board, both looking just as self-important. They marched straight up to the wall like they were conducting a crime scene investigation. One of them even brought a measuring tape. I leaned against a porch post, watching the whole thing like it was free cable. The 3 of them huddled together, whispering like middle schoolers scheming behind the bleachers. Then they all stomped off in a dramatic little huff. I figured that might have been the end of it. Maybe they'd finally accepted the loss. But nope, I was dead wrong. Later that night, I checked the footage from the game cameras. I just wanted to make sure everything had been recorded, and that's when I saw it. One of Brenda's buddies looked straight up at the camera, then reached into her bag and pulled out a can of spray paint. She didn't use it, not yet, but she was ready. That's when I knew they weren't done. They were planning something. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. And I had just built the battleground. 2 days after Brenda's little ATV incident, the whole neighborhood started buzzing. People walking their dogs slowed down when they passed my property. A few gave me quiet nods. Maybe it was respect, maybe just curiosity. Others couldn't even look me in the eye. You could tell they were torn between HOA loyalty and the pure drama of it all. But Brenda wasn't hiding out or licking her wounds. Nope, she was organizing. Flyers started appearing on everyone's mailbox, big bold red letters screaming, "Emergency HOA meeting." The topic? Something vague like community safety and obstructive structures. But I knew exactly what it meant. She was coming for the wall. She was coming for me. Now, technically my land wasn't part of the HOA anymore, but since I lived right next to it, I still had the right to attend meetings as an adjacent concerned neighbor. So I showed up 5 minutes early, sat in the back of the clubhouse with a bottle of water and a GoPro tucked into my shirt pocket, just in case. The room had maybe 24 people, all sitting in folding chairs, sipping lemonade, and pretending this wasn't a neighborhood witch hunt. Brenda stood at the front with her arms crossed, tapping her notes like some overworked middle manager. She was wearing a pastel cardigan and a string of pearls, like she thought she was running for office. But the look in her eyes told a different story. There was a storm coming. As soon as the meeting kicked off, Brenda jumped right into what she called a presentation. In reality, it was a full-blown rant. She held up a big, glossy photo of her flipped ATV lying next to my wall, like she was showing evidence from a courtroom drama. This dangerous, unapproved barrier, she declared, was built right across a historic community access trail. She kept throwing around words like historic and community like they were part of some legal statute. But anyone who'd lived here more than 10 years knew that path behind my barn was just an old tractor route leftover from the 80s. Still, Brenda spun the story like a pro, acting like droves of neighbors had been peacefully strolling through that trail every day. I glanced around the room. Not a single head nodded in agreement. In fact, most folks were staring down at their shoes. Then she got to the threats. Brenda pulled out a stack of bogus violation slips, waving them like they were actual court summonses. She claimed I'd been fined $12,000 for a laundry list of imaginary infractions: visual obstruction, landscape noncompliance, safety hazards, unauthorized structures, you name it. It was a whole blizzard of nonsense, stacked so high I almost had to admire the effort. But I didn't blink. When she finally opened the floor for comments, I stood up slowly, thanked her for the entertaining slideshow, and then got right to it. I told the group, calmly and clearly, that my land wasn't under HOA control. Then I pulled out the stamped exemption documents I'd gotten from the county office and passed out copies to the folks sitting in the front row. Brenda tried to cut me off, but I raised my hand and kept going. I explained about the surveillance cameras, the posted signs, the harassment, and most importantly, that she had zero legal right to call that trail public access. That's when the room shifted. People straightened up in their chairs. A few actually nodded. One woman near the front whispered, "Finally." Brenda went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. You could tell she hadn't expected me to come this prepared. But then she tried a new angle. She said that even if I was technically exempt from the HOA, I was still part of the community and should follow its shared norms. That's when I dropped the hammer. I let them know I had legal representation, and if I received one more fake violation or threatening letter, my attorney would be contacting county officials on grounds of harassment and abuse of power. Brenda's face twisted like she'd just bitten into a whole lemon. The room stayed dead silent. I turned and walked out before she could even think about responding. For a second, I thought maybe things would cool off. But the very next day, I found my wall defaced with bright pink spray paint. Scrawled across the boards, in sloppy cursive, were the words, "Land Thief." It looked like a toddler's meltdown written in Sharpie. I went straight to the game camera footage. And there it was, clear as day. Brenda's teenage daughter, Haley, wearing a hoodie, laughing with another girl, holding a can of paint. After tagging the wall, they took off into the woods, giggling like they just pulled off the crime of the century. Sure, I could have gone to the cops right then and there. But I had a better plan. I called my cousin Alan. He's a civil rights attorney who specializes in property law. Lives a few counties over and had been looking for an excuse to visit the farm anyway. When I told him what happened and sent him the video, he laughed for a solid 5 minutes. Said it was exactly the kind of ridiculous HOA power trip he loved taking apart. The next day, he rolled up to my place with a stack of legal letters, a calm grin, and a digital folder packed with everything we needed to shut this down. We walked into the next HOA meeting together. Brenda was already up front, mid-speech, scolding someone about having too many wind chimes. Alan waited for a pause, stepped forward, and introduced himself. Then he handed her the cease and desist notice and made it crystal clear. If she or anyone from the HOA tried to contact me again, or even stepped foot on my property without permission, we'd be taking immediate legal action. Brenda tried to puff herself up, throwing out bluster like usual, but Alan shut her down without blinking. He calmly read out the specific section of state law that proved her so-called fines were bogus. Everyone in the room heard it, plain and loud. He made sure there was no confusion. I wasn't bound by the HOA, and I definitely wasn't obligated to play along with her made-up rules. The silence that followed was brutal. Brenda froze in place like someone had hit pause on a bad internet stream. Then Alan handed the board secretary a flash drive, footage of Brenda's daughter spray painting the wall. He looked her dead in the eye and said, "If we wanted to press charges, we could." That changed everything. Brenda's entire vibe shifted overnight. She stopped barking orders at the neighbors. Her ATV vanished from the trail completely. But I knew better than to think she was finished. That weekend I noticed something strange, a flicker of light out in the field around 2 a.m. I pulled up the drone feed, and sure enough, there she was again. Brenda, creeping alongside the wall with a flashlight, like she was scouting it out. She didn't touch anything, just stood there staring at it, maybe hoping it'd disappear, or maybe just trying to psych herself up for something worse. Whatever it was, the camera caught every second of it. I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't just about a shortcut anymore. This was about control, power, and she was about to learn just how powerless she really was. It all started again a few nights later, just after midnight. I heard this low humming noise. At first I figured it was wind pressing against the wood, nothing major. But when I stepped out onto the porch with a flashlight, the sound changed. It was mechanical, intentional. I scanned the field and spotted shadows moving near the trail. People, dressed in dark clothes, crouching low around the base of my wall. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the live drone feed. Infrared kicked in. There they were. 5 of them. One had bolt cutters. Another was holding what looked like a crowbar. 2 others stood guard, watching the tree line. And right in the middle, Brenda, pointing at the support beams like she was running some kind of midnight military operation. She didn't come back with paperwork. She didn't come back with facts. She came back with a demolition crew. At 1 a.m, I hit record. Let the drone hover quietly overhead, its software blending in with the wind through the trees. They started in on the far end, right where the wall didn't have concrete reinforcement. The woman with the crowbar jammed it beneath a post and started prying while Brenda whispered orders like some bootleg general. They weren't just trying to take it down, they wanted to erase it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. After all the warnings, all the legal letters, even the threat of police involvement, she'd gone full sabotage. But I was one step ahead. Before Brenda made her move, I'd already given Deputy Cruz a heads up. Local guy, good sense of humor. I'd shown him the footage of the spray painting, the HOA letters, the whole bizarre mess. He chuckled and said it was one of the strangest neighbor disputes he'd ever seen, but he promised to keep an eye out. So the moment they started breaking stuff, I sent him the drone footage live. His response was just one word: on my way. Down by the wall, Brenda and her crew were making progress. They'd torn off a crossbeam and stacked it neatly to the side, like hiding the evidence would magically erase the fact that they were literally on camera. I watched from my porch, barely breathing. The red and blue lights exploded through the trees like a 4th of July rave gone wrong. Brenda whipped her head around so fast I thought her neck might snap. I heard a car door slam, and then a voice rang out through a loudspeaker, sharp and commanding. Step away from the structure and keep your hands where I can see them. And just like that, the panic hit. One of Brenda's crew took off into the woods, dropping a bag of tools in the dirt. Another froze like he'd been caught in a spotlight, wide-eyed and useless. But Brenda, I'll give her this much, she didn't run. She just stood there, fists clenched at her sides, jaw locked tight like she was trying to will the whole moment into not being real. Deputy Cruz walked up, his flashlight sweeping across the scene. When he spotted Brenda, his eyebrows shot up. "You again?" he asked with that dry, amused tone that only made her face twist with rage. She launched into some rambling excuse about access rights and historical paths, something about an emergency ATV route, whatever that was supposed to mean. Cruz didn't let it fly. He just pointed up at the drone quietly hovering above us. "Footage is already uploaded," he said. "You've been caught on camera, dismantling private property. That's trespassing. That's vandalism." Brenda tried to spin it around, said the wall was a safety hazard and someone had to take it down. Cruz didn't even blink. "Are you a licensed inspector?" She didn't answer. So he followed up with the obvious. "Did the property owner give you permission to be here tonight?" Still nothing. I watched the whole thing unfold from my porch, every second of her falling apart. She was charged right there on the spot. Hauled off in the cruiser while the rest of her crew stood around awkwardly, waiting for someone to come pick them up. And, almost poetically, her little dog barked nonstop from the porch across the street, like it was throwing a tantrum in her absence. By the next morning, the neighborhood was lit up with gossip. Photos of Brenda getting walked to the squad car were already making the rounds on Facebook. One post had the caption, "HOA Queen Dethroned," complete with a crown emoji and a still shot from my drone footage. Someone else shared a link to a local news segment. Turns out a reporter caught wind of the incident through the police scanner. They aired a piece that afternoon on suburban property disputes spiraling out of control. They didn't mention Brenda by name, but let's be honest, everyone around here knew exactly who they were talking about. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that same evening, without Brenda at the head table this time. I didn't bother showing up, but word spread fast. 2 board members reportedly called for her removal. One even admitted Brenda had pressured them into helping plan the wall takedown. Alan filed the civil lawsuit that very day. He didn't hold back either. Drone images, timestamps, police records, even one of Brenda's fake violation notices were all included in the paperwork. She was being sued for property damage, trespassing, harassment, and emotional distress. And Alan? He also sent a formal complaint to the county commissioner's office, accusing the HOA of abuse of authority and misuse of power. Less than 48 hours later, I got a notice confirming that the HOA was officially under investigation. In less than a week, Brenda had gone from playing neighborhood cop to being an actual criminal defendant. She made bail quickly, of course, but she didn't come back swinging. Her house went completely dark. No porch lights, no barking dog, no early morning ATV revving through my backfield. The silence was louder than her old rants ever were. I used that quiet time to rebuild the wall, this time even sturdier than before. I added a new layer of decorative stone facing the street, just for good measure. And I put up a new sign too. Big, bold letters. This is not a shortcut. And just underneath, in smaller print, property boundaries matter. Over the next few days, I watched people stroll past, glance at the sign, and smile. A few even chuckled. One guy gave me a thumbs up as he walked his dog past the wall. Some guy passing by gave me a thumbs up and said, "You're kind of a local legend now." Now look, that was never the goal. I wasn't trying to become a neighborhood icon. I just wanted peace, and for people to respect the boundaries. But Brenda tried to bulldoze right through all of that. Now she was the one boxed in by more than just a wooden wall. The fences were legal this time, and a lot stronger than the one she crashed into on her little ATV joyride. That wall was just the beginning. Now she was staring down something much taller. A case built out of legal filings, video footage, and a whole lot of public humiliation. When the court date finally arrived, the hallway outside the courtroom was dead quiet, except for the sharp clack of Brenda's heels echoing off the tile. She strutted in ahead of her lawyer, who honestly looked like he'd just passed the bar exam last week and already regretted answering her call. She was dressed like she was heading to a baby shower, not a court hearing. Light pink jacket, matching purse, pearl necklace bouncing every time she turned to scowl at something. I was sitting way down the row with Alan, who looked calm as ever, stack of files on his lap, tablet in hand, watching the drone footage like it was his favorite movie. We didn't say a word when she walked by. She avoided eye contact but mumbled something under her breath, loud enough to be noticed, but not clear enough to matter. Alan leaned over and whispered, "The higher they puff themselves up, the better they fall." Inside the courtroom, things moved a lot faster than Brenda probably imagined. She'd filed some response that tried to paint herself as a concerned neighbor, just trying to protect the community. Her lawyer leaned hard on phrases like civic duty, public risk, and community care. But when the judge asked her directly if she had permission to be on my land or to dismantle part of a private wall, all Brenda could offer was a long pause, followed by a barely audible no. Then it was Alan's turn. He stood up and laid it all out, start to finish, like the opening act of a courtroom drama. He played the drone footage, Brenda and her crew sneaking around at night, tools in hand, actively tearing down the wall. Then he showed the game cam clip, Brenda and her daughter spray painting insults on the boards like it was some teenage rebellion. Next came the stamped exemption papers, proving beyond doubt that my land wasn't under HOA control. And to top it off, he dropped copies of the cease and desist notices, plus the official incident report Deputy Cruz filed after the midnight takedown attempt. The judge didn't ask a lot of questions. She didn't need to. You could read everything you needed to know right from her face. Brenda, who probably thought she could spin this into a slap on the wrist or cry her way into a soft settlement, started realizing she was fresh out of backup plans. And then, it got worse. One of the witnesses Alan called was a guy named Harold. Quiet, polite, clearly nervous. He was actually one of Brenda's own HOA board members. When asked if Brenda had encouraged the wall demolition, he let out a sigh and said, "Yes." Then he dropped the real bomb. She told him that if he didn't help, she'd dig up minor violations on his property and fine him into submission. Brenda's attorney jumped in with an objection, but the judge let it stand. That moment changed everything. This wasn't just about property damage anymore. This was about manipulation, intimidation, abuse of power. Brenda looked like she wanted to melt into her seat. Her lawyer scrambled to say something useful, but it didn't hold water. Alan didn't even need to go on much after that. He wrapped it all up with a simple statement that hit home, not just about what Brenda had done to me, but how someone who made herself queen of the block tried to rule like a dictator. The judge stepped out for a few minutes and came back with a decision. Brenda was found liable on every count. She was slapped with $25,000 in damages, hit with a formal restraining order requiring her to stay at least 300 feet away from my property, and, this was the kicker, the court referred the HOA's actions to a state oversight committee for further investigation. Her lawyer looked like his soul had left the building. Brenda just stood there, completely frozen, like her brain couldn't even register what had just happened. As we walked out, folks gathered in the hallway started whispering and pointing. Word had clearly spread far beyond our little neighborhood bubble. A local reporter, one of those small-town types who loves covering local drama, was there, notebook in hand. He didn't get an interview with Brenda, but he did catch the perfect shot of her storming out, that pearl necklace of hers swinging with rage instead of smug confidence. It was almost poetic. I shook Alan's hand in the parking lot, and he grinned. "I kinda hope she tries to appeal," he said. "I wouldn't mind a second round." But the drama didn't stop at the courthouse. That same evening, Brenda tried to get her beloved ATV out of impound. That's when the final piece of the puzzle dropped. The police told her it was being held as part of an ongoing property crime investigation, and until the state attorney's office finished reviewing everything, it wasn't going anywhere. She threw a fit, of course. Claimed it was her main mode of transportation for wellness, said she had back problems, and needed it to get around the neighborhood. They asked for medical records. She didn't have any. They asked why she'd used it to trespass. She didn't have an answer for that either. They turned her away. She ended up screaming in the parking lot at a teenage receptionist, who calmly walked back inside and locked the door behind her. Meanwhile, the HOA was crumbling. 2 more board members resigned after hearing about Harold's testimony and the State Oversight Committee getting involved. The president of the board posted a statement online saying that, while the HOA had historically operated independently, they were now suspending all enforcement activity pending a full review. Which, let's be honest, was basically a formal apology without actually saying, sorry. People who'd backed Brenda started quietly deleting their supportive Facebook comments. One neighbor even came by my door the next day to apologize. Said she used to believe all the nonsense Brenda had told everyone about me, that I was some conspiracy nut who bought land just to make the HOA look bad. I laughed and said, honestly, I prefer chickens to conspiracies. Brenda never came back to public life after the ruling. Her house stayed dark. No more flyers, no more ATV revving through my field, no more fake neighborhood patrols. For a while, it almost felt too quiet. But I took the peace as a gift. I planted more flowers along the rebuilt wall. Even started designing a small mural for the side facing the trail, a cartoonish ATV soaring over a wooden fence, with the words, "Keep out," underneath in a friendly but firm font. It wasn't about rubbing it in. It was about making sure the line was clear. That boundaries, real ones, legal ones, moral ones, had finally been restored. And as for Brenda, the real punishment wasn't the fine. It wasn't even the restraining order. It was watching her lose every ounce of power she thought she had. No one was afraid of her clipboard anymore. No one showed up to her meetings. No one believed her stories. She spent years trying to build herself a little kingdom on nothing but control and fear, and in one season of truth, resistance, and a very well-placed wall, that kingdom vanished. Now, when the breeze rolls across my land, it feels like the whole property is exhaling. The scent of fresh cedar still lingered in the air from the updates I'd made to the wall. It stood taller and prouder than ever. 4 weeks had passed since the court ruling, and there was no sign of Brenda. Her house looked like time had hit pause. No footprints on the porch. No HOA flyers in the mailbox. No buzz from that infamous ATV engine tearing down the trail. The whole neighborhood felt like it had finally snapped out of a weird, prolonged fever dream. I hadn't realized just how much noise and tension she'd brought into all our lives until it was gone. That silence? It felt like actual peace. But peace wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of something new. With Brenda dethroned and her grip on the HOA shattered, the board held a real open meeting. For once, they invited actual homeowners, not just her hand-picked circle of rule enforcers. The vibe was different. It was cautious, but hopeful. People who used to roll their eyes at HOA meetings now showed up with serious questions. I hadn't planned to say a word, but when they asked for volunteers to help write new guidelines, a few neighbors turned to me, smiling. One of them nudged me and said, "You fought harder than anyone. You should help make sure this doesn't happen again." And they were right. I didn't step up because I wanted authority. I just seen what happened when the wrong person got too much of it. I proposed a full audit of the HOA's powers. Clear boundaries. Checks and balances. No more one-person judgment calls from a porch throne. It took time, and not everybody liked the changes, but things started to shift. The board officially scrapped Brenda's made-up title. No more enforcement liaison. No more fake badges. No more weaponized newsletters. They reworked the violation system too. Every dispute now required third-party review, with actual documentation before anyone could issue a fine. For the first time, the HOA started acting like it worked for the people, not against them. Meanwhile, Brenda's house quietly went up for sale. The listing showed carefully cropped photos to hide the dead flower beds and the scratches on the garage left by her ATV rack. The description was bland: quiet street, strong community ties, scenic trail nearby. But everyone local already knew the story. Weeks went by. Not a single offer. Then a red banner popped up on the listing. Price reduced for quick move. I overheard someone joke, "Even her house wants to escape her." Eventually, a buyer from out of town grabbed it, probably without knowing the full saga. Brenda moved out early one Sunday morning. Just her and her daughter, quietly loading a rental truck. No eye contact. No goodbyes. No neighbors came out to help. Not one wave. The next day, I took a walk down to check the far end of the trail, just in case she'd left behind another surprise. And sure enough, I spotted something odd. There, buried under overgrown weeds on what used to be her side of the line, was a decorative concrete slab. I brushed it off and found a small patio and a shed she had built 2 years ago. I double-checked my old property maps just to be sure, and yep, the whole thing was sitting on my land. By law, anything left unclaimed on private property becomes the landowner's after a certain period. I stood there in the field and just laughed. Even on her way out, Brenda had accidentally left me one last ridiculous gift. I didn't tear it down. Instead, I turned the shed into a chicken coop. Painted a sign on the side that read, "Brenda's Retreat." I even added a little weather vane shaped like an ATV on top. It became kind of a neighborhood landmark. One guy brought his grandkids over to take a photo in front of it. Another neighbor offered to print t-shirts with the logo. I never expected the wall saga to turn into local folklore, but here we were. And honestly, I didn't mind. If it reminded people where unchecked ego can lead, it was worth keeping around. As summer rolled in, the trail behind my place came alive again, but this time in the right way. There were no more rogue ATVs cutting through the grass. No more neighbors being harassed over wind chimes. Instead, I saw kids biking safely down a new trail I opened up, on my side of the property, marked clearly with permission signs and boundary markers. I even hosted a little barbecue for the neighborhood. Something Brenda would have never allowed without 3 permits and a noise warning. People showed up with food, stories, and plenty of laughs about the whole ordeal. It felt simple. The way things should have been from the start. The wall still stood strong, not just as a physical boundary, but as a symbol. A reminder that sometimes, you have to stand your ground when someone tries to bulldoze right over your rights. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was principle, set in concrete, backed by footage, and sealed in court minutes. It marked the line where someone else's entitlement finally met someone's enough. Looking back, I realized, this was never just about a shortcut through a field. It was about how small people with a taste for control can become dangerous when no one tells them no. Brenda built herself a kingdom, one based on fear, fake rules, and made-up authority. But like any empire built on sand, the moment someone pushed back, it collapsed. I didn't win because I yelled louder. Or played dirtier. I won because I kept records. I stayed calm. I didn't let absurdity rewrite reality. And people respected that. Now, when folks walk past my property and glance at the wall, I hear them mutter things like, "Good for him," or, "Finally, someone stood up." And honestly, that's worth more than any court ruling or viral video. That wall changed things, not just for me, but for everyone who watched someone like Brenda finally hit a boundary she couldn't move.